morning and welcome to Daybreak, which is live on AnewZ. I'm your host, Nadia, Gyane, here to take you through the day's top stories. So let's take a look at the headlines. Trump hits the pause button to attack Iran following a request from the Gulf states. 3 people are killed in a shooting at one of California's largest mosques. And at least 118 people have died from an Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, officials say. First, this morning, US President Donald Trump has postponed a Tuesday military strike on Iran to give ongoing peace talks more time. Negotiators are racing against the clock as Pakistan passes a new revised conflict resolution plan from Tehran to Washington.
President Donald Trump says the United States is holding off on a possible military strike against Iran, saying Gulf nations urged Washington to give diplomacy more time as serious negotiations continue with Tehran. Trump stressed that the US would not allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon, but indicated he hopes a diplomatic solution can prevent a wider regional conflict.
We're not going to let Iran have a nuclear weapon. So I was called by these 3 countries plus others, and they're dealing directly with our people and, right now, Iran. And there seems to be a very good chance that they can work something out. If we can do that without bombing the hell out of them, I'd be very happy, please.
The comments come as indirect talks between Washington and Tehran appear to be making progress, despite ongoing mistrust and continued tensions across the Middle East. Iranian officials say they are reviewing US feedback and have already sent a revised 14-point proposal to Pakistani mediators. The new draft focuses on trust-building measures to end the war that began with US and Israeli attacks in February. Despite a ceasefire reached in April, tensions remain high. Iran's foreign ministry says it approaches the talks with deep skepticism, citing Washington's track record. Tehran also dismissed repeated US threats that military action could resume if negotiations fail. Disagreements also persist over a key economic issue. Iranian state media claims Washington agreed to waive sanctions on Iranian oil during the talks, but a US official flatly denied that claim, calling it false. Meanwhile, global energy markets are on edge. Oil prices are climbing over fears of prolonged supply disruptions, particularly through the vital Strait of Hormuz.
Now let's take a look at the story shaping the day across the globe, and we head first to Reuters' website in relation to a shooting that's happened in the US, California, San Diego. 5 dead, including 2 teen suspects after shooting at a San Diego mosque. So what do we know is that 2 teenage gunmen opened fire on Monday morning at an Islamic center in San Diego, killing 3 men outside the mosque, is what officials say. Now, one was a security guard. Later, the 2 suspects were found dead, apparently from self-inflicted gunshot wounds, police say. Now, if we turn to the New York Times, that's also being shown on there. And I also want to just read out the headline in regards to what's taking place on the New York Times. It says all the children attending a day center at the actual Islamic school. Here we are. Suspect's mother warned police missing guns before mosque attack. But the children that were staying there, who were actually learning in the Islamic Center, that was part of the center, the largest in the region, were accounted for and safe after the shooting. Now, the incident is now being investigated as a hate crime, according to FBI, due to writings found by one of the suspects' mothers. Now, the US President Donald Trump has called the deadly attack a terrible situation as more information is being investigated in relation to that. And this is just a press conference there. If we just scroll down, we might be able to see some more pictures in relation to this particular story as well, as it happened over the course of the Monday period, local time, just before 12 noon, in regards to the shooting and another hate crime that we know has happened in the US. We know that certain places of worship have been targeted by people. One of them previously before was at a Jewish place of worship, and now at a mosque in San Diego, which is what they're saying amid rising reports of Islamophobia happening across the US and other parts of the world now. Okay, now let's go to our next story, which was our leading story this morning, and that's on the BBC, and that's in relation to what US President Donald Trump has said. He's called off new Iran attack at request of Gulf states, which he had planned to do on Tuesday, and he says because serious negotiations are now taking place. Now, he put this all on Truth social media and said that he's been asked to do so by leaders of Qatar, Saudi Arabia and the United Emirates. He said that he had been informed a deal would be made, and that is what he actually said in his own words was very acceptable to the US, and added there would be no nuclear weapons for Iran, but has warned that the US would be ready to go forward with a full large-scale assault on Iran at a moment's notice if there was no acceptable deal. Now, just to add to that, a senior Iranian military commander told the US not to make strategic mistakes and miscalculations again. So we are watching this particularly closely, as Pakistan is the main mediator between both of these countries to see whether or not some form of agreement can be agreed to. In relation to that. And just to add that some 64% of voters in the US believe it was a wrong decision to go to war with Iran. And that was according to a new New York Times Siena poll, which was published on Monday, which found out that information. So we will be providing you with more details later on in the programme in regards to Iran and the US. Now, let's go to our next story, and that is Ebola. And The Guardian is leading with this particular story: infectious diseases such as hantavirus and Ebola becoming more frequent and damaging, experts. Now, what we do know now is that at least over 118 people have died because of this Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there's been one death in the neighbouring country of Uganda. We know that there's been more than 390 cases suspected so far, and health experts warn that people should follow public health measures because there are no approved drugs or vaccines to combat this particular disease. Now, there have been 2 confirmed cases so far, and the World Health Organization has declared the outbreak a public health emergency of international concern. Now, due to this, some African countries have decided to close their borders, one of them being Rwanda, who closed its border in the Goma crossing over the weekend. So we'll keep you up to date with any of new stats in relation to cases and, unfortunately, deaths relating to this outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Okay, now let's go to our next story this morning, and that's over on BBC again, but this is in relation in Turkey. A gunman kills 6 and injures 8 in Turkey, media say. What we know currently is that there was a gunman who decided to kill, reports say that the male suspect allegedly fatally shot his ex-wife before driving to a restaurant and killing its owner and an employee. 3 more people nearby were also killed, as well as the gunman fled the scene. Now, a large-scale police operation is now underway with helicopter support continuing overnight, and the suspect's identity and motives were not immediately known or identified. And that information came out on Monday evening by Turkey's President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who described the attack as heinous. And if we just look at this map, the map that you can see on your screen now, it just shows you the area of where this particular attack took place, and that the manhunt and where the manhunt is actually going. So you could see it says Tarsus maybe on your screens a bit more. It's not very clear, maybe if you scroll in a little bit more, but this is exactly the area where the attack took place, which killed at least 6 people, is what reports are currently saying in relation to this story. Okay, now let's turn to our final headline this morning, and that's on Deutsche Welle's website. That's in relation to China and Russia. China's moment: Putin heads to Beijing after Trump courts Xi. So Russian President Vladimir Putin is due to arrive in China later on this evening and will meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping on Wednesday. Now, the 2 leaders are due to discuss areas of bilateral relations, including the proposed Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline. Now, an article that has been published in Russia's state media said that the visits of the US and Russian presidents showed Beijing was fast emerging as the focal point of global diplomacy. It said that the tightly sequenced visits have sparked widespread attention, with analysts noting that it is extremely rare in the post-Cold War era for a country to host the leaders of the US and Russia back-to-back within a week of each other. And just a reminder in relation to China and Russia's a deepened relationship. Russia has been a cause for concern in the West. So this particular relationship is a little bit unnerving, particularly because Moscow launched its full-scale invasion on Ukraine in 2022, and the two leaders have met on more than 40 occasions, far exceeding Xi's encounters with any Western leaders. But we'll keep you up to date as soon as Putin arrives later this evening, and they will then therefore meet on Wednesday to discuss a number of topics and issues in relation to both of their countries. Okay, well, that was your morning press roundup. I'm now going to take a short break. When I return, I'll have the rest of the global stories to go through. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. You're watching Daybreak. Now let's have a look at the global stories for the morning. We head over to the US, and authorities in California are investigating a deadly shooting at a mosque in San Diego as a hate crime after 3 people were killed, along with 2 teenage suspects who were later found dead from self-inflicted injuries. Let's go to the report.
Police say 2 teenage gunmen opened fire outside the Islamic Center of San Diego shortly before noon on Monday, killing 3 men, including a security guard. San Diego Police Chief Scott Wall said officers later found the 2 suspects, aged 17 and 19, dead inside a vehicle from apparent self-inflicted gunshot wounds. Authorities say all children attending a school inside the mosque complex were safely accounted for. The FBI has joined the investigation, which police are treating as a possible hate crime. Investigators are still trying to determine what led to the attack and whether another nearby shooting incident may be connected. Residents gathered outside the mosque following the shooting, expressing grief and concern over rising anti-Muslim hostility.
It's just sad that someone died today. It's very sad, especially in the mosque. They didn't do anything at all, and they do not deserve that. And I just feel so bad, and it's actually very I don't feel good at all about it.
I think that they went in there when they knew Muslims would be in there. They went in there looking for people gathering there for religious reasons. And I don't think that the mayor, Todd Gloria, is doing enough to condemn the hatred towards Muslims.
And it's a terrible situation. I've been given some early updates, but we're going to be going back and looking at it very strongly. Yeah, please.
Police said the security guard who was killed may have helped prevent even greater loss of life during the attack.
Greenland says progress has been made in talks with the United States over the island's future, but insists it's not for sale. US Special Envoy Jeff Landry met Greenland Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen and Foreign Minister in the capital on Monday. It comes after the US President Donald Trump repeatedly expressed interest in acquiring the territory. Greenland's leaders said they were seeking constructive solutions with Washington, but rejected any possibility of annexation or purchase. The head of Moldova's public radio and television broadcaster has resigned following public backlash over the country's voting in last weekend's Eurovision Song Contest. Hundreds of fans took to social media to criticize Moldova's jury after it awarded only 3 points to neighboring Romania, despite the close linguistic and cultural ties between the 2 countries. Speaking at a news conference, broadcaster chief Vlad Târcanu said the institution had distanced itself from the jury's decision, but acknowledged responsibility for the controversy. Now over to the war in Ukraine, and tensions between Russia and Kyiv continue to escalate, with both sides reporting fresh strikes targeting critical infrastructure and industrial facilities. Meanwhile, concerns are growing over the security of Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant as Moscow and Kyiv exchange accusations amid stalled peace efforts.
Ukrainian authorities said a Russian drone strike damaged vehicles at an enterprise in the northern city of Chernihiv on Monday. Officials said a fuel truck and another vehicle were heavily damaged in the attack. Firefighters carried out cooling operations at the scene following the strike, while no casualties were immediately reported. Meanwhile, Russia said it carried out a massive retaliatory strike on Monday, targeting enterprises linked to Ukraine's military-industrial complex, energy infrastructure facilities, and military port infrastructure. In a statement, the Russian Defense Ministry said the strikes were conducted in response to Ukrainian attacks on Russian territory. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Mikhail Galutzin told reporters in Moscow that there were no signals from Kyiv regarding the next round of peace negotiations, adding that Moscow remains in constant contact with Washington on the issue. In a separate statement on Telegram, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said Ukraine's strikes on Russian energy infrastructure were having a significant impact, claiming many companies had been forced to reduce oil production and shut down dozens of oil wells.
In just recent months, Russia's oil refining has dropped by 10%. It is also important to note that Russian oil companies are being forced to shut down their oil wells. This is even more significant. Given the nature of Russian oil production, this is what hurts them most, apart, of course, from losing money.
Meanwhile, the head of Russia's state nuclear corporation, Rosatom, warned that the situation around the Russian-held Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant in Ukraine was approaching the point of no return, due to increased Ukrainian attacks in the area. The Russian-installed management at the plant, Europe's largest nuclear facility with 6 reactors, said Ukrainian forces had attacked the site for the 3rd consecutive day.
Just days after hosting Donald Trump, China's Xi Jinping is set to welcome Russian leader Vladimir Putin. The meetings underscore Beijing's growing role in a fractured geopolitical landscape. Here to discuss this is Nadia, political analyst. Welcome to the program. My first question in this is that in less than a week, Chinese leader Xi Jinping is hosting his strong ally, Russia. What does this tell us about us, especially about the sequence of timings from when he first saw Trump to now Vladimir Putin?
Hi, good morning. Thank you for hosting me. By hosting Putin immediately, Xi Jinping is effectively giving Moscow direct briefing on what happened during the United States and the China talks. This is we can say like synchronizing the watch. It's exactly the right term. What we can use it because like it shows that Xi Jinping has nothing to hide from the Moscow, and Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin in the same side of the geopolitical competition.
Well, these two countries have had a long and lasting relationship, which has been very much at the forefront, which people can see. Should the West now be worried about their deeper renewing of ties?
West actually is worried for a long time of their alignment. We can say it like China is owning the Russians' resources. At the same time, for this long time of the Russian-Ukrainian war, China was selling the microchips and all the sanctioned double usage high technology to Russia. At the same time, Russia were buying mainly the drone technologies from China. And yes, it's like West should be worried about it, and West is actually worried.
And what does that meeting now in relation to the West being worried? We don't actually know what the meeting signifies, but what are the key topics of discussion in relation to both leaders?
Another key topics could be about like deepening economic and energy dependencies, because one of the things that Trump gave, the signal that gave to the China, it's that the China will not receive anymore Venezuelan oil, and it will be a hard time for China receiving Iranian oil. So the deepening energy collaboration between Russia and China, it also gives them Russia more possibilities to sell to China more petroleum, more oil products, more crude oil, at the same time the gas. So China is interested to buy more carbohydrate resources from Russia, and it's also the historic and symbolic milestone. The visit serves as an anchor for to institutionalize long-term bilateral ties. So these two things gives to China and Russia very good ties between two countries, and it makes them more solid and more consolidated.
So would you say that some analysts have said that their joint ties have actually helped Russia to continue the war against Ukraine? Where does Xi Jinping sit on the fence in relation to the war in Ukraine, and also helping Russia's economy as well in relation to that?
Exactly. That's the point. So by the keeping Russia in war, Xi Jinping makes Russia more dependent on China, and Russia is only country that can buy the Chinese products, like the sanctioned products. At the same time, China buys the Russian oil and gas in a very low, with discounted prices. At the same time, keeping the Russia in a war, China buys the resources of Russia, like wood resources of Russia, and gets them more inside of the Russia, in Siberia side, buys the Russian rare materials, rare minerals and metals. So, and it makes Russia more weak and dependent on the China. At the same time, it also makes Europe and United States more dependent on this war, because now Europe is in a very clutch situation with this war, and China makes Europe more dependent on China, and creates the inner conflict inside the Western world. Now, because of this war, we can see that Europe and the United States start to separate from each other, and this makes the Western world and Western societies more weak. So this war and keeping the Russia on this war gives to China more geopolitical benefits.
Well, we're definitely seeing some cracks when it does come to Europe and the US and their alignment. But what does this meeting now, what can we read into it, just because we've had two leaders coming over to see Xi Jinping? Does that mean that China is definitely more in the upper hand, displaying its rising world power, that it's having these key leaders come to visit it rather than China going over to the US or China going over to Russia? What is the analysis around that?
China is being one alone by itself, and we can say that, like before this meeting, we can position China as one of the growing countries. But after this meeting, China definitely emphasized its hegemony and says that there's not only the United States as a world superpower, China is also became the superpower. And there's only two superpowers in the world. Not even Russia is a superpower anymore. And with this visit, as I said, Putin arrived in Beijing less than 44 hours after the United States President Donald Trump concluded his high-profile state visit. And this visit, Putin's visit, was just a routine visit. It wasn't a very official visit. And this message was like, we are here with you. with China. So at the same time, Putin said like if Trump offered you anything because for like petroleum for another thing, Russia is ready to give it in the very low discounted. At the same time, summit reinforced the united front against the Western geopolitical dominance, particularly as Russia navigates ongoing isolation and sanction stemming from this conflict in the Ukraine. Russia is more and more became the under dominance of China, saying that Russia and this visit and show that China is only the power in the Eastern Hemisphere, and Russia became the part of Chinese dominance.
I see. Well, that's really interesting that you say that, especially once Putin arrives tomorrow. We'll definitely have, meets with Xi Jinping tomorrow. We'll have more information as to how this meeting goes. So thank you so much, Mr. Nadia, for your time this morning.
Thank you for hosting me.
A fragile ceasefire now as we go heading over to the Middle East between Israel and Lebanon is under growing strain as Beirut says the death toll from Israeli strikes have now crossed the 3,000 mark. Fresh attacks across southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley are raising fears the conflict could spiral once again despite international efforts to uphold the ceasefire.
Lebanon's health ministry says more than 3,000 people have now been killed since fighting between Israel and Hezbollah escalated in early March. Officials claim that at least 7 people were killed on Monday alone in strikes carried out across the country, despite a US-backed ceasefire extension announced just days earlier. Among those killed was a senior figure in the Palestinian Islamic Jihad movement after an Israeli airstrike targeted an apartment building in the town of Doris in eastern Lebanon's Baalbek district. The conflict intensified after Hezbollah launched rockets into Israel following an Israeli strike that reportedly killed Iran's supreme leader. Since then, near-daily exchanges of fire and airstrikes have continued to deepen regional tensions. Lebanon and Israel agreed on Friday to extend their ceasefire by 45 days, with negotiations expected to resume in early June. But Lebanese officials say the violence has continued, with more than 400 people reportedly killed since the ceasefire first took effect on April 17th. The US brokered agreement allows Israel to carry out strikes targeting what it describes as Hezbollah military activity. Lebanon, however, says the ongoing attacks are undermining efforts to restore state control over weapons held by armed groups. Israeli strikes have continued to hit towns and villages across southern Lebanon and the Bekaa Valley, leaving dozens dead in recent days and casting fresh doubt over whether the ceasefire can hold. Regional and international mediators are continuing efforts to prevent the conflict from escalating further, as both sides prepare for another round of negotiations next month.
Over to the Caribbean, and Cuba has issued a sharp warning to Washington after a report claimed Havana had acquired military drones and discussed possible attacks on US targets. Cuba's foreign minister vehemently denied such claims. Let's take a look at this report.
Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel says any US military action against Cuba would lead to a bloodbath with incalculable consequences for regional peace and stability. His comments came after an Axios report, citing classified intelligence, said classified intelligence suggested Cuba had acquired more than 300 military drones and discussed plans to target the US naval base at Guantanamo Bay, US military vessels, and Key West, Florida. In a post on X, Diaz-Canel said Cuba poses no threat to any country, including the United States, but has what he called an absolute and legitimate right to defend itself against a military attack. Foreign Minister Bruno Rodriguez also said Cuba has the right to self-defense under the UN Charter and international law, accusing those seeking to attack Cuba of using false pretexts. On the streets of Havana, residents echoed the government's defiant tone.
I know for a fact that Cuba is a strong country. We Cubans are very brave and we're not going to back down.
If they come, they'll have to fight, because Cuba will fight back. That's what I can tell you. My country, whether we're hungry or not, no matter what, will fight back. They'd better not come, because there's going to be a fight.
There must be an agreement between the two sides to talk and negotiate whatever they want. And Cuba must also enforce its laws, do you understand? But they shouldn't invade Cuba. Cuba will defend itself at all times, but it will never hand over the country. It will never hand it over.
The warning comes as Cuba faces worsening economic pressure after the United States cut off its energy supplies earlier this year, leaving the island with severe fuel shortages and limited electricity.
Now over to the continent of Africa, and a rapidly spreading Ebola outbreak in Central Africa is triggering international concern, with the World Health Organization warning the virus may already be circulating far beyond the current confirmed cases. Here's this report.
The World Health Organization says a rapidly expanding Ebola outbreak in Central Africa may be far larger than currently known, raising fears of wider regional spread. Emergency response teams are being deployed across Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo as authorities struggle to contain an outbreak of the rare Bundibugyo strain of Ebola. The World Health Organization has classified the crisis as a public health emergency of international concern after infections spread into Uganda and reached the Congolese city of Goma. UN officials say more than 482 suspected infections and around 116 suspected deaths have been reported in Ituri province since April, while laboratory testing has so far confirmed 8 cases. The outbreak's true scale may still be unknown.
You will have seen that yesterday, the World Health Organization said that the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda constitutes a public health emergency of international concern, highlighting the high risk of further spread and the likelihood that the outbreak may be larger than currently detected. The outbreak involves the Bundibugyo strain of the Ebola virus, for which there are currently no licensed vaccines or specific therapeutics.
Investigators say the first identified patient was a healthcare worker who died in Bunia after suffering fever, vomiting, and hemorrhaging symptoms. Officials believe the virus may have circulated silently for weeks in conflict-hit areas where insecurity and weak healthcare systems continue to hamper surveillance.
This is a severe and potentially devastating outbreak, and until the outbreak is over in Africa, it will not be all clear everywhere.
US officials also confirmed that an American infected with the Bundibugyo strain will be transferred to Germany for treatment, alongside 6 people considered high-risk contacts. At the White House, US President Donald Trump said the outbreak remains centered in Africa.
Well, thank you very much. Go ahead, Ebola. Ebola, you said Ebola.
Yeah. Should Americans be concerned about Ebola?
I'm concerned about everything, but certainly am. I think that, it's been confined right now to Africa, but it's something that has had a breakout.
The WHO has meanwhile airlifted nearly 5 tons of protective equipment and emergency supplies into the region to support overstretched medical teams.
Over to East Africa now, and at least 4 people have been killed and 30 more injured in protests across Kenya, linked to nationwide transport strikes over rising fuel prices, according to the Interior Minister. Thousands were stranded in Nairobi as roads emptied, businesses closed and schools shut. Transport was disrupted as operators withdrew services, leaving commuters with limited options. Authorities say 348 people have so far been arrested. The unrest follows a fuel price rise of more than 20%, driving up transport costs and worsening living conditions. Kenya relies on imported fuel and continues to feel global supply pressures despite a ceasefire in the Middle East. Now to China, and it says it has discovered a major new rare earth deposit in its cold northeastern region. The discovery comes as competition intensifies worldwide over access to strategic resources essential for the future of high-tech industries. Our correspondent Manor Makdoum has more from Beijing.
China has announced a major new rare earth discovery in its icy northeastern region, a development that could further cement the country's dominance over global rare earth supplies and processing. Chinese media reported that the newly identified deposit contains significant reserves of strategic minerals used in electric vehicles, semiconductors, defense systems, and advanced manufacturing technologies. The discovery was made in northeast China, an area known for its harsh winters and rich mineral resources. Officials and experts said that the find could strengthen Beijing's long-term resource security at a time of intensifying technological competition with the United States as well as the Western economies. China already controls the majority of the world's rare earth refining and processing capacity. The announcement comes as countries worldwide are racing to secure stable supply chains for critical minerals essential to the green energy transition and high-tech industries. Analysts say that the new discovery could reinforce China's leverage in the global rare earth market and deepen its strategic advantage in key industrial sectors. Manur Makdoum, AnewZ, Beijing.
Global energy officials are warning of a looming summer supply squeeze as commercial oil inventories rapidly decline. It now takes a moment for the International Energy Agency says commercial oil stock supplies worldwide have already only have several weeks of supplies remaining. Speaking to G7 finance ministers in Paris, Executive Director said March's emergency release added 2.5 million barrels a day to the market, but warned those strategic reserves are limited. The IEA's latest report states mounting supply losses from the Strait of Hormuz are drawing down inventories at a record pace, making further price volatility likely. A powerful dust storm has swept across Iraq on Monday, reducing visibility and sending people with breathing difficulties to hospital. Emergency departments reported a rise in respiratory cases, particularly among elderly residents and patients suffering from asthma and chronic lung disease. Doctors warn that prolonged exposure to the storm could also affect otherwise healthy people as visibility across the city dropped dramatically. Now to a quick break. When I return, I have the rest of global stories and a few regional ones. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back and thank you for joining me this morning. Let's turn to the stories making its headlines across the region, and we head first to Turkey, where Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan and his German counterpart have held a joint press conference in Berlin after reviving a strategic dialogue mechanism between Turkey and Germany for the first time in more than a decade. The talks covered Turkey-EU ties, Gaza, Iran and the growing crisis around the Strait of Hormuz. Here are the details.
Hakan Fidan's visit to Berlin is being framed as a reset in Turkish-German diplomacy. The two foreign ministers co-chaired the third Turkey-Germany strategic dialogue mechanism, a platform launched in 2013 but dormant since 2014. According to Turkey's foreign ministry, the talks focused on bilateral relations, Turkey-EU ties, security and defense, and regional issues. At a joint press conference, Fidan said the war involving Iran must be solved through diplomacy, adding that Turkey would continue with all its might to help bring the conflict to an end. He also condemned Israel's forced interception of the Gaza-bound Samud aid flotilla, saying 25 vessels had been stopped by Israel on Monday in violation of international law. Fidan described the interception as thuggery. Waterfall, for his part, said Germany wants to expand strategic ties between Turkey and the European Union. On the Palestine-Israel conflict, he said Germany, like Turkey, supports a two-state solution, while also stressing Berlin's support for Israel's right to self-defense. The German foreign minister also repeated the assertion that Iran must not obtain nuclear weapons. Both ministers warned about the global impact of the ongoing closure of the Strait of Hormuz, which has intensified concerns over energy prices, supply security, and shipping routes. Based on what was said at the press conference on Monday, the meeting in Berlin wasn't only about Turkish-German relations. Rather, it was also about how Ankara and Berlin coordinate on the crises now shaping Europe, the Middle East, and global energy markets. This is Adam Morrow for AnewZ in Istanbul, Turkey.
Germany will deploy a Patriot air defense system to Turkey as part of NATO security efforts, the German foreign minister said on Monday during a press conference. The deployment, expected to begin at the end of the month, will include Patriot battery and around 150 German soldiers, replacing a US unit. Germany's defense ministry says the deployment is planned to remain in place until September 2026. 6 people have been killed and several wounded after a series of shootings across southern Turkey on Monday, according to local reports. Officials said the suspect first killed his former wife before targeting a restaurant and several other locations, opening fire at civilians along his escape route. Among the victims were a restaurant owner, an employee, a teenager, and a truck driver. Police and law enforcement units launched a large-scale manhunt using helicopters and drones to search the area while setting up checkpoints on nearby roads. Now let's turn to what's happening on our doorstep, and if you can just see the background behind me tells me that we are at the UN World Forum, Urban Forum in Baku, which is taking place the whole of this week. Now, Baku is hosting an international conference on youth and decolonization, bringing together representatives from 22 countries this week. Let's go to this report for more.
Morocco is that they try to involve youth in all the processes. They made them not only a status, but also a decision-making person. We give a lot of value to youth right now because we see that they are very intellectual. They want the best for their country. The rule is that youth should be involved. We should be influenced to make a better country, better situation for every social class, to not marginalize poor and prefer the elites. And we should break this issue that we had from the colonization before.
Staying on the World Urban Forum, Saudi Arabia and Azerbaijan have highlighted growing economic and strategic ties, with officials pointing to shared development goals under their respective Vision 2030 strategies. Saudi representatives praise Azerbaijan's rapid urban transformation, green development initiatives and infrastructure modernization, describing Baku as an example of successful urban planning and quality of life focused growth.
In fact, Azerbaijan Vision 2030 and Saudi Vision 2030 share a common focus on the well-being of citizens in both countries. And truly, when we saw the green city of Baku, the beauty and the development witnessed across many regions of Azerbaijan, it strongly resembled the development taking place in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. We have the Saudi Green Initiative, and we also have major urban development projects. So there is a great harmony between the two brotherly peoples, the Saudi people and the Azerbaijani people. Personally, from the moment I arrived at the airport, I witnessed remarkable progress in infrastructure, urban expansion, and urban development. This development reflects the attention and care of the leadership, headed by His Excellency, the President, as well as the Azerbaijani people's commitment to quality of life, which we can clearly see. We hope that there will be even greater cooperation between the two peoples and the two leaderships, because honestly, partnership with the Azerbaijani government and its distinguished people is something we truly aspire to in Saudi Arabia. So we hope for the success of the exhibition, and we also hope to see many agreements and deals between Saudi and Azerbaijani private companies in the near future.
Staying at the World Urban Forum 13, the climate and housing resilience titled a new session called A Gender Perspective Behind, highlighted the critical role of civil society in urbanisation processes. It's a panel discussion brought together representatives from government institutions and members of the public to discuss urban resilience and inclusive decision making. Speakers emphasised that women are among the most affected by climate change and homelessness, while participants engaged in an active and constructive debate on the importance of including civil society voices in urban policy decisions. While at the forum, Ukraine and Azerbaijan are holding talks on the restoration and reconstruction of war-affected areas, including the implementation of joint infrastructure projects in Irpin. This was stated by Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister. Let's go to the report.
We have a very fruitful cooperation with Azerbaijan, and here with us also, please come to me. This is a representative from Irpin, Angela Makeyeva, a secretary of Irpin City Council, and Azerbaijan assists us to rebuild some objects in Irpin. And of course, for us, this is very symbolic that we are here and to have such conversation also with governments.
Now time for a quick break. When I return, I'll have a full update on the latest headlines, plus a look at what's making the front pages. Stay with me. Hello, you're watching Daybreak on AnewZ, and I'm your host, Nadia Gyane. If you're just joining me, I'm here to take you through the top stories throughout the day, so take a look at the headlines. Trump hits the pause button to attack Iran following a request from the Gulf states. 3 people are killed in a shooting at one of California's largest mosques. And at least 118 people have died from an Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of Congo, officials say. Now let's take a look at the stories shaping the day across the globe, and we head first over to the BBC and what's been going on around the world because of an excitement around Swatch's Royal Pop watch. Now, what has been happening across social media? There's been a frenzy of young people, mostly men, queuing up to head over to Swatch because they've done an actual collection with luxury brand Audemars Piguet, which is AP, and Swatch to bring together a very high-class, interesting and colourful swatch. If we just press play on here, I'm just going to be able to show you some pictures of the queues that happened and the lineup around a number of cities. We go from London, we go to New York, to Barcelona, to Milan, Chicago. These are the queues that you are now seeing on this particular video of loads of people, scuffles taking place, police presence as well, just trying to manage long crowds because of the excitement around this particular swatch, this watch that has been released in the market for just over $400. Okay, now if we scroll down a little bit more, we might be able to see what these actual watches look like in relation to this particular story. But the colourful watches from the 1980s, AP Swatch has described the Royal Pop collection as a disruptive collaboration between 2 icons of Swiss watchmaking, which is why it's become so popular. They've done a huge advertising campaign, not realising that it actually has worked to a fault in some cases, because now they've had to shut a number of stores and actually manage how many watches customers are able to buy. So they've limited it to 1 watch per customer. So loads of people are still queuing to get them. However, what's also happening, as you can see there, as we just bring up an example of what these watches look like, is that they're also being resold on the internet for hundreds more. At least one customer said that he sold his watch for $1,000 after buying it for just over $400. So we can see how interested people are in getting these particular watches, how they look, and especially because it's a luxury brand at an affordable price between these very key watchmakers. Now, as I mentioned, several stores across cities across the world were closed, were having to shut as we went to, there was a swatches in New York, Chicago, Barcelona, Milan, London, even in France as well, because of such a high demand in relation to getting these swatches. And if we continue to go down, you'll be able to see some of these colourful watches and what they actually look like. Now, what analysts are saying is that, is it worth the hype? Well, that is still to be decided, as this was only released this week. And crowds are still flooding shops and hoping that they're able to make a purchase and queuing for hours on end because of what they see as a very, very valuable watch that they can either sell or have as a keepsake. Okay, now let's go to our next story this morning, and we head over to the Guardian website in relation to Ebola and the outbreak there, which is in the Democratic Republic of Congo right now. The cases are rising, but not only that, deaths are rising to up to at least 118 people have died from this particular disease. And the WHO, the World Health Organization, is watching this very closely, calling it a public emergency for international concern. Now, yesterday we reported that this number was roughly around 80 people, which has now grown to over 118 currently. Now, this number may or may not grow, but they are watching this very carefully, with trying to make sure that those who feel that they have symptoms are seen to immediately and make sure that they have all the regular medical attention in relation to this as well. They've said that it's not a global pandemic, but they are trying to make sure that they confine it to this particular area. And neighbouring countries, Uganda has actually reported 1 death due to the Ebola outbreak, and Rwanda, who also shares a border with the Democratic Republic of Congo, has decided to close its Goma border crossing just to limit any type of diseases or those travelling to and from the countries, to make sure that it is self-contained and nothing spreads any further. Okay, now let's go to our third headline this morning, and that's in relation to Trump and Iran. And if we go to the BBC website, it's also on the New York Times, CNN, and a number of places, just because Trump has decided to call off new Iran attack at request of Gulf states. Now, he announced this yesterday at a press conference, saying that he'd been contacted by a number of Gulf states, including Saudi Arabia and Qatar, not to attack Iran, and actually negotiations are now up and running between the two countries. Now, Iran says that they are open to negotiations and to talking, and Pakistan is very much the middleman in all of this, making sure that they play a mediating role between the US and Iran. However, Trump did say that he is ready at any moment in time to attack Iran as well if things do not go his way. Now, he is calling for them to have no nuclear weapons, which has been a top priority for the US for a number of weeks now. And it's something that Iran has pushed back on. They believe that their program is only for the country of enhancement and not to attack anyone, but it's something that the US and Israel are vehemently against and do not want Iran to have any form of nuclear weapons. Due to this, the Strait of Hormuz is still shut, with a few vessels going through, but that capacity has dropped right down to at least 20% since the war there broke out in February, and US military has blocked Iranian ports due to that. So things are still at a standstill. We'll see exactly what happens and whether or not negotiations can pick back up again, but we will let you know throughout the course of the time. Now, let's go to this report with some further information on Iran and the US.
President Donald Trump says the United States is holding off on a possible military strike against Iran, saying Gulf nations urged Washington to give diplomacy more time as serious negotiations continue with Tehran. Trump stressed that the US would not allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon, but indicated he hopes a diplomatic solution can prevent a wider regional conflict.
We're not going to let Iran have a nuclear weapon. So I was called by these 3 countries plus others, and they're dealing directly with our people and right now Iran. And there seems to be a very good chance that they can work something out. If we can do that without bombing the hell out of them, I'd be very happy. Please.
The comments come as indirect talks between Washington and Tehran appear to be making progress, despite ongoing mistrust and continued tensions across the Middle East. Iranian officials say they are reviewing US feedback and have already sent a revised 14-point proposal to Pakistani mediators. The new draft focuses on trust-building measures to end the war that began with US and Israeli attacks in February. Despite a ceasefire reached in April, tensions remain high. Iran's foreign ministry says it approaches the talks with deep skepticism, citing Washington's track record. Tehran also dismissed repeated US threats that military action could resume if negotiations fail. Disagreements also persist over a key economic issue. Iranian state media claims Washington agreed to waive sanctions on Iranian oil during the talks, but a US official flatly denied that claim, calling it false. Meanwhile, global energy markets are on edge. Oil prices are climbing over fears of prolonged supply disruptions, particularly through the vital Strait of Hormuz.
Over to Greenland, and it says that progress has been made in talks with the US over the island's future, but insists it is still not for sale. US Special Envoy Jeff Landry met Greenland Prime Minister Jens Frederik Nielsen and Foreign Minister in the capital on Monday. It comes after the US President Donald Trump repeatedly expressed interest in acquiring this territory. Greenland's leaders said they were seeking constructive solutions with Washington, but rejected any possibility of annexation or purchase. Now to Baku, and Azerbaijan's President Ilham Aliyev has given an interview to Euronews addressing a range of issues, including urban development, energy security and regional stability. He also outlined Azerbaijan's reconstruction efforts in post-conflict areas and its growing role in Europe's energy supply. Here's more.
Mr. President, great to see you as always. Over 40,000 people from 82 countries. This is the second largest event in Azerbaijan since COP29. What does hosting WOOF 13 mean for Azerbaijan in terms of their international role in shaping the future of sustainable urban development?
For us, of course, it's a great honor to be a host country for WOOF 13. 182 countries gathered here. And this is a good demonstration of respect towards Azerbaijan. And as far as I know, the number of participants is a record high. So this really is a demonstration that the topic is important, and the host country also is a country which has a lot of international connections. And of course, for us, it's also an opportunity to report to the audience, the international community, about what has been done so far, what are our plans, and also to learn from our partners, because the level of participation and the number of heads of state and government demonstrate that today urban planning is really something which many leaders think about. And as I said in my remarks, harmony between preservation of historical heritage and architectural heritage and need to modernize the cities should go hand by hand.
Well, obviously, Azerbaijan has presented smart city and green energy projects, across Karabakh and also East Zangezur, both areas of post-conflict, and their rebuilding of those areas. How can you see these projects contributing to global urban innovation? What can people learn from yourselves? You talk about other people,
I think that we have so far elaborated a unique experience how to build cities and villages from scratch. Yeah. It was unfortunately due to the large-scale devastation of the occupied territories, so we had to do it. So the step-by-step approach, and in some cases the parallel track on development led to the fact that in 5 years' time we already have 85,000 people returned back. So electricity, number one. So far, we already commissioned 307 megawatt of hydropower, and 340 megawatt of solar power is under construction right now. So this will be enough not only for Karabakh and Eastern Zangezur, but to the much broader area. Also, connection of electricity grid to the whole country was organized. 75 kilometers of tunnels, out of which 70 kilometers already commissioned, and 500 bridge 435 of these bridges already done. Railroads, schools, hospitals. So all goes in parallel. And first years of reconstruction, mainly we invested in infrastructure. Now we mainly invest in housing. And the city plans, smart city, smart village concept, plan for every village, all that is being done. So this really, for those countries which suffered the similar problems like we did, that could be a pattern for reconstruction.
A blueprint, so to speak, for the rest of the world to follow suit, which is amazing. Now, Azerbaijan has also become a very important contributor to Europe's energy security. How do you see Azerbaijan's role evolving as Europe diversifies there?
Yeah, we started our cooperation on energy track with Europe some time ago. Especially it, had a speed up process after 2020, when we commissioned the Southern Gas Corridor, which today provides natural gas for 16 countries.
Yes.
And by this number of supply by pipeline gas, the number of countries we provide energy, we are number one. The number is growing.
Yes.
10 members of European Union are our clients, and in total 12 countries from Europe are recipients of Azerbaijani gas. The number of countries is growing. The number of requests for us to start cooperation is growing. And fortunately, we made our homework with the pipeline infrastructure and also with the upstream. So now the level of production is going up. Very soon, probably in the beginning of next month, we will report about the beginning of gas production from the new field. So it's a win-win situation. We need a premium market, which is Europe.
Yes.
And Europe needs alternative source of supply, which is Azerbaijan. So we combine our efforts and established a very fruitful cooperation with European Commission.
Thank you. You have been a really big advocate for diplomacy and stability in the region and beyond. Now, the Hormuz crisis is impacting regional and global economies. How is Azerbaijan approaching and dealing with that?
We are not affected by the crisis with respect to the supply chain, because our policy of diversification of energy supplies and routes is not a policy of today. It's for many years. We're pursuing it, and we managed together with our partners, with the neighbors, to build a diversified supply chain, whether it's oil, gas, electricity, or connectivity. And of course, what is happening now in the Middle East to a certain degree influences everybody, because some may think that the high oil price could be beneficial. Yes, it is, but at the same time, countries which are rich with oil reserves, many of them are investing in the treasuries, many of them are investing in stock markets, and when this turbulence happens, the stock market goes down. So we lose money from our investments while earning a little bit from high oil price. So everybody is affected by that. But from point of view of our own energy projects, no, we are on the safe side. And always, as you mentioned, advocate for diplomacy. Without diplomacy, we wouldn't have been able to deliver our resources to the markets.
Yeah.
Because we had to go across the countries to have good relations with neighbors of the neighbors, established a multilateral format of cooperation, create a win-win situation between producers, transitors, consumers, so everyone obeys the rules and everyone gets profit. So from this point of view, I think experience of Azerbaijan can be useful. After the crisis is resolved, hopefully sooner than later, probably it will be a new situation. Many countries will reconsider their energy policy and the ways of delivery of energy supplies. And most probably, Azerbaijan's geography and already assets will be needed more than today.
Mr. President, always a pleasure to speak to you. Thank you so much for
Thank you
talking
very
to us
much.
today, as always.
Thank you.
very
Always
much.
pleasure to
Thank
see you. Glad to see you again.
No,
in
always great to
Azerbaijan.
be back. Thank you for having me. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Thank you, everybody.
A very in-depth interview there by President Ilham Aliyev. Well, now we head over to the US, and authorities in California are investigating a deadly shooting at a mosque in San Diego as a hate crime after 3 people were killed and 2 teenage suspects were later found dead from self-inflicted injuries. Here's more.
Police say 2 teenage gunmen opened fire outside the Islamic Center of San Diego shortly before noon on Monday, killing 3 men, including a security guard. San Diego Police Chief Scott Wall said officers later found the 2 suspects, aged 17 and 19, dead inside a vehicle from apparent self-inflicted gunshot wounds. Authorities say all children attending a school inside the mosque complex were safely accounted for. The FBI has joined the investigation, which police are treating as a possible hate crime. Investigators are still trying to determine what led to the attack and whether another nearby shooting incident may be connected. Residents gathered outside the mosque following the shooting, expressing grief and concern over rising anti-Muslim hostility.
It's just sad that someone died today. It's very sad, especially in the mosque. They didn't do anything at all, and they do not deserve that. And I just feel so bad, and it's actually very I don't feel good at all about it.
I think that they went in there when they knew Muslims would be in there. They went in there looking for people gathering there for religious reasons. And I don't think that the mayor, Todd Gloria, is doing enough to condemn the hatred towards Muslims.
And it's a terrible situation. I've been given some early updates, but we're going to be going back and looking at it very strongly. Yeah, please.
Police said the security guard who was killed may have helped prevent even greater loss of life during the attack.
Now over to the Middle East, and a large Gaza-bound aid flotilla has been intercepted by Israeli forces in international waters, according to organisers. The operation has sparked strong reactions from activists and governments amid renewed debate over the naval blockade on Gaza.
Israeli forces have intercepted a Gaza-bound aid flotilla carrying dozens of vessels in international waters, according to organisers. The global Sumud flotilla said more than 50 boats were stopped around 250 nautical miles from Gaza as they attempted to deliver humanitarian aid and challenge Israel's maritime blockade. Activists said military personnel boarded several vessels during the operation.
We are claiming that this is a kidnapping happening in international water. This is an illegal act of piracy, and this is one more reason to make sure that the governments and the citizens of the world condemn Israel and cut off ties with this apartheid regime.
Ships from the global Sumud flotilla had set sail for a 3rd time on Thursday from southern Turkey after earlier attempts to deliver aid to Gaza were also intercepted by Israel in international waters. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu defended the operation, saying it was aimed at preventing support for armed groups in Gaza.
Well, please convey my congratulations to all the soldiers in the force. I think you are doing an outstanding job, both with the first flotilla and with this part, and actually effectively nullifying, cancelling a malicious plan designed to break the isolation we have imposed on Hamas terrorists in Gaza.
Turkey strongly criticised the operation, with President Recep Tayyip Erdogan calling for international action and the safe return of Turkish citizens involved in the mission.
I curse in the strongest terms this act of piracy and banditry against the passengers of Hope on the Sumud flotilla, comprised of citizens of 40 different countries.
Israel says it will continue enforcing its naval blockade on Gaza, arguing it is necessary for security reasons and to prevent weapons from reaching Hamas. The incident adds to rising international tensions over humanitarian access to Gaza and the legality of the blockade as diplomatic pressure continues to mount.
At least 4 people have been killed and more than 30 injured in protests across Kenya linked to a nationwide transport strike over rising fuel prices, according to the Interior Minister. Thousands were stranded in Nairobi as roads emptied, businesses closed and schools shut. Transport was disrupted as operators withdrew services, leaving commuters with limited options. Authorities say over 340 people have been arrested. The unrest follows a fuel price rise of more than 20%, driving up transport costs and worsening living conditions. Kenya relies on imported fuel and continues to feel global supply pressures despite a ceasefire in the Middle East. A rapidly spreading Ebola outbreak in Central Africa is triggering international concern, with the World Health Organization warning the virus may already be circulating far beyond the current confirmed cases. Here's more.
The World Health Organization says a rapidly expanding Ebola outbreak in Central Africa may be far larger than currently known, raising fears of wider regional spread. Emergency response teams are being deployed across Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo as authorities struggle to contain an outbreak of the rare Bundibugyo strain of Ebola. The World Health Organization has classified the crisis as a public health emergency of international concern after infections spread into Uganda and reached the Congolese city of Goma. UN officials say more than 482 suspected infections and around 116 suspected deaths have been reported in Ituri province since April, while laboratory testing has so far confirmed 8 cases. The outbreak's true scale may still be unknown.
You will have seen that yesterday, the World Health Organization said that the Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo and Uganda constitutes a public health emergency of international concern, highlighting the high risk of further spread and the likelihood that the outbreak may be larger than currently detected. The outbreak involves the Bundibugyo strain of the Ebola virus, for which there are currently no licensed vaccines or specific therapeutics.
Investigators say the first identified patient was a healthcare worker who died in Bunia after suffering fever, vomiting, and hemorrhaging symptoms. Officials believe the virus may have circulated silently for weeks in conflict-hit areas where insecurity and weak healthcare systems continue to hamper surveillance.
This is a severe and potentially devastating outbreak, and until the outbreak is over in Africa, it will not be all clear everywhere.
US officials also confirmed that an American infected with the Bundibugyo strain will be transferred to Germany for treatment, alongside 6 people considered high-risk contacts. At the White House, US President Donald Trump said the outbreak remains centered in Africa.
Well, thank you very much. Go ahead, Ebola. Ebola, you said Ebola.
Yeah. Should Americans be concerned about Ebola?
I'm concerned about everything, but certainly am. I think that, it's been confined right now to Africa, but it's something that has had a breakout.
The WHO has meanwhile airlifted nearly 5 tons of protective equipment and emergency supplies into the region to support overstretched medical teams.
Now we head over to Europe, and the cruise ship is at the centre of a deadly hantavirus outbreak, which is docked in Rotterdam. Here's our correspondent with more information.
Welcome to This Day in Europe, where the cruise ship at the center of the deadly hantavirus outbreak has docked in Rotterdam, triggering the final phase of a complex international containment operation. The MV Hondius arrived in the Dutch port Monday after becoming the focus of a multi-country health response triggered by an outbreak of the rare Andes strain of hantavirus, a virus usually linked to rodent exposure, but one of the few known strains capable of limited human-to-human transmission. 3 passengers, a Dutch couple, and a German national have died. 10 cases have been identified in total, including 8 confirmed and 2 probable infections. Dutch health officials say 25 crew members and 2 onboard medical staff disembarked under controlled conditions, with no one showing symptoms. The 2 Dutch crew members, a doctor and a nurse, are isolating at home, while the remaining crew, mostly from the Philippines, will quarantine in mobile units set up in Rotterdam. The ship itself will now undergo a week-long disinfection, with cabins linked to infected passengers receiving special treatment. Health authorities stress this is not a broader public health threat. Unlike highly transmissible respiratory viruses, hantavirus requires close and prolonged contact for person-to-person spread. Charling Leinstra, the head of the Dutch Coordination Center for Communicable Disease Control at RIVM, said, quote, "There's no risk for Rotterdam and that all those exposed are under monitoring and quarantine." Still, officials are not declaring the crisis over just yet. With an incubation period of up to 6 weeks, health agencies across several countries continue monitoring former passengers already dispersed around the world. Dutch Harbour Master René de Vries said, quote, "We didn't see this coming, that a ship that ran into trouble in Antarctica would dock here in the Netherlands. 10 days ago, we weren't ready for that, but we set up an entire quarantine village in just a few days." For AnewZ, I'm Anita Sharma in Arnhem, Netherlands.
Now to some sport, and football fever has already taken over Mexico City ahead of the 2026 World Cup, with museums across the capital launching major exhibitions dedicated to the sport's history and cultural impact. At Museo Yancuic, visitors can explore more than 15,000 football memorabilia items, including Pele's crown and shirts worn by legends such as Diego Maradona, David Beckham, Lionel Messi and Cristiano Ronaldo. Meanwhile, another contemporary art museum is hosting an exhibition examining football through art, featuring nearly 100 works from artists across 13 countries. The exhibitions are part of a wider World Cup cultural programming across the city, which expects more than 5 million tourists during the tournament. And just as a reminder, the World Cup kicks off on the 11th of June, so not much time. So please make sure you are already ready to watch it wherever you get your football from. But thank you so much for watching Daybreak with me this morning and taking the time to make sure that you are up to date with all the news. Make sure you stay tuned to AnewZ for more information, and we're also covering the World Urban Forum as well. So stay tuned to AnewZ. Take care.